one best answer, true and false. So that was the basis of the assignment. But I need time to look at each of the assignment. And if you have something you had an issue with, you can send me a message and I will review it and I will give you an answer back. Good?
Yeah, we're good.
Perfect. So we're going to move on to today's session. So we are in week 3. I'm just going to be sharing my screen with the class. And again, you will become familiar with my style. And this is the first one, first opportunity. So opportunity for you to get to know me and opportunity for me to know where the class is in terms of the level when it comes to the topic for this particular class. And we're lucky that we have this opportunity very early in the semester. With some other classes, it's really just at the midterm that this happens. So it will give you a chance to know what to expect in the next chapter test and subsequent tests. And it gives me a chance to know where this class is overall with the material. And then I will share with you what the next chapter test will include, and I will share with you what the midterm in class will include too, like I just did tonight. So we are going to talk about research design, secondary and syndicated data, or secondary data that is available when you do research. This is chapter 3, so this is taken from the book. So I'm assuming that you have had access to the book or you've managed to buy the book. And if you haven't, it's going to be a challenge to follow the material. I'm using the book for the test and for some of the questions, some of the answers. So not only to build the class material, but also to do the exam and the test like I did today. So if you don't have the book, you'll be limited. So you should really consider getting the book, and it is something that was also required in terms of the book. Last week, as I said, I have produced 2 videos to give more insight about the class lecture 1, class lecture 2, because we do not have a chance. Week 1 we've missed because we had a holiday. Week 2, we had a lot of content to go through with the introduction, so we did not have a chance to go through all of the class lecture. So I created a video, and my expectation is that you've gone through all those videos too for tonight's test. If you haven't, then that might be a reason why you may have had challenges of going through the test that we've done today. So in lesson 1 and 2, we've talked about defining the business problem, so that we understand what is the business trying to do. So last week we looked at Levi's, and we've asked some questions that Levi's had specifically. And then I've also provided some sample answers in Canvas that you have available. So by now you should all be aware that all the class material is available on Canvas, and that includes the class recording for you to go back, and then the class lectures. And the class lecture for tonight is also available there. So defining the problem is step 1. And then, so what is the business trying to do? If you think back to Levi's from last week, Levi's said we want to expand to certain market, and we want to expand to 2 markets. One of them was India, and I think the other one was USA. And Levi's sells jeans. So they came to you as a researcher and then as an international business research. And they've said, we want to expand the market. And then we'd like to know whether or not we should be expanding the market. Then you've said, okay, so what is driving people's buying jeans? What are the consumer preferences when it comes to jeans? And I think that was a very explicit question. And you said this is probably what we would research as step number 1. And why did we say consumer preferences? Because we've said, well, what makes people buy jeans or not buying jeans? And then we've looked at potentially what was available on the web. So Levi said, we want to expand to market, but should we expand to market or not? And then you said, what is influencing consumer behavior? And we said consumer preferences for jeans. Then we've said, how are we going to find out what has been done and what has been researched when it comes to consumer preferences for jeans? That would be step 2, which is developing an approach to the problem. So you're saying, well, why do people care about genes, and then what has been researched. And then let's go and find out. If we find out that there's not a lot of research that has been done, then that means you have to do your own research, your primary research. We will talk about that tonight. But I have shared with you some examples of research that have been done for consumer preferences. And then what they found. So they found attributes. They found there are certain things that people are looking in genes, and that was really done through research. And then if we were to continue with Levi's, then we may want to do our own research, and we may want to do our own primary research as well. And that we may have to do because perhaps what you find is the research that was done for Levi's or for consumer preferences for genes was done in the USA. And we are in the international market research, perhaps consumer preferences and what people decide when in India, when they actually even think of genes, may be very different. So we're going to learn tonight that because a research was done to a specific context, it may not be applicable to another country. And you may have another bigger challenge in India. Perhaps genes is not it's not something, and I'm just making it up. It's not something that necessarily people will think of buying. They'll think of other items. So that means you have competition for products. You have substitute products. So this is maybe now another reason or another research problem that you want to solve as well. So defining the business problem, or what the business is really trying, is key. And then defining how are we going to answer what the business is trying to answer. This is the part that you come in and you say, well, this is what we should do. And that is the approach of the problem. So last week, we went in more details about these two steps. Now we're going to move on to formulating a research design, or at least getting more answer as to what are we going to do in our research. And then so we're in step 3. And here we are going to talk about the secondary and syndicated data analysis. We're going to talk about qualitative research. There's survey. We're going to mention survey or observation research. You may have heard of experimental research, measurement and scaling, questionnaire, sampling, and preliminary. Tonight, we're going to talk more about syndicated and the secondary research, primary and secondary research. I think we're going to mention it's part of qualitative research at this point, and survey. And then step 4, then that will be the following week. So I was just sharing with you, where are we when it comes to research and the steps? And if you remember on week 1, we said there are about 6 steps that we're actually going to do in this class. We are going to do these steps with the research project as well. So we are in step number 3 now, formulating the research design. If we go back to our project, which is the international market research that you have to do in teams. So tonight I'm going to give you time to meet with your team and validate the teams and validate that you are within the team. You should already be now thinking about a business and hopefully think about what is the business problem that the business is trying to answer. And then you should already also, at least knowing the business of the problem will be a good progress that you should for your team. And if you already have the problem and you're clear on the problem, and you may have already have a bit of an idea of how you're going to answer, what you're going to do to answer in terms of, it will depend again on the topic that you will be selecting. But if we think back of Levi's, then, and if you have a business that is similar to Levi's that you're picking, then you may say we're going to do some research about consumer preferences in the USA or in India as well. So we need to have an international element, very important as well. But you should really, really at least be clear on who's going to be your team. And but you will have to finalize tonight and then start thinking about what the business will be for your project. So a research design is you're starting to build a bit of a sense of what are we going to do in our research. So we know another business problem, and we know what is affecting consumer buying genes, or perhaps if you're trying to think about you work for a mental health company and your business is mental health, and you want to understand what COVID impact on mental health that had in the specific areas, then you're already going to start thinking about, are we going to do survey? Are we going to do questionnaire? We're going to do interviews. So you're kind of thinking about how could we go about finding out or getting answers to our questions that we have from the business, and answers that we want to get through the research. So it's your blueprint. And when we say blueprint, if you think of a house, building a house, architect, you're kind of like starting really defining what will be involved in your study. And usually, typically, the first step that you'll do is, do we really understand, let's say, consumer behavior when it comes to buying jeans? So if I go back to Levi's, how do people decide on buying jeans? And then you may not really know even. And this is where you do secondary research to see what has been done about when it comes to people buying jeans. So the other thing that other example that we could use is if you do want to do a research that is about mental health and COVID and mental health. And last week we've talked about, you need to understand what are the components that you're actually involved with dealing with. So we've said jeans, there's consumer preferences. Maybe there are other things too. Now, if you think of mental health, then what is mental health, right? So we said we have COVID. I think COVID is easy to define, but we have this thing called mental health. And then you would have to think, what are the components or what could affect mental health? And there are multiple things that could affect mental health. So, and you would need to do some secondary research to really understand what is mental health and how do we even measure, how do we even assess mental health? And then maybe there are other things as well that you would need to consider. And then when you think of your research design, so this is where you start thinking about the what you will do to be able to get the answers to your question and to really solve the marketing research problem, right? But again, it starts with, are we clear on what the problem is that we're trying to understand through our research? So just like a builder can take a blueprint or an architecture or a blueprint of a house, and they can start thinking of, what am I going to need to do to build that house? And it's different if I'm building a house, if I'm building a condo, or if I'm building a triplex, duplex, or a high rise, or if it's for consumer or for its businesses. So you can start thinking about what you're going to need, and you can already even get a sense of timing as well. What will be the timing of these activities that you will do? So when you think of a research design, and the book again goes in a lot more details. My goal is not to repeat everything that the book will say, but to bring examples on top of what you will see in the book and what you will see in the PowerPoint. But usually it starts with the secondary research or syndicated research as well. So we're going to talk a bit more about what is secondary and what is syndicated research tonight. Qualitative research. So at this point, and I will tell you, most of the research that you will do will be qualitative. And if you are very good with data and you're very comfortable and familiar with data, and you could probably do qualitative research, but there are a lot more restrictions. Sorry, quantitative research. When it comes to quantitative research, we are going to talk in this class about quantitative research as well, but most of us will do qualitative research in our career. Now, the syndicated research, often they will do surveys, and those will deal with quantities, and they will have sampling, and they will have statistical significance. But when you do qualitative research, you're not interested in statistical significance, and it's not necessarily that you're dealing necessarily with big numbers either. Then survey and observation. So observation for some research are really, really powerful. And this is, I will say, observation field studies are related, and field studies usually is you're going into the field and you're actually observing, or you're collecting data, or maybe you're just observing, and maybe you want to see, how do people buy jeans in the store? So perhaps let's say that you work for Levi's and you want to do the study for Levi's, and you said, you know what, we are going to do a survey for our customer to understand the customer preferences. Okay. And if I go back to triangulation last week, so maybe we're going to do a survey so that we want to understand consumer preferences, and maybe we will do observations. So we are going to go to a store, and physical store, and we are going to look at, how do people look for jeans? What do people even do when they actually take a pair of jeans in their hand? So you're going physically to something and you're collecting data. You may even do some interviews there too. So first you may start with observation of, how do people actually look and take a pair of jeans? And then you may actually put them through a study, and you would obviously, you would need to have, you need to be prepared for this, but you would come to a store and you will say, hey, we're doing a research, and would you be interested to be part of this research? The part of the research is I will follow you as you go through the store and you actually look for genes. I will take notes initially. I will just follow you. But then when you decided on the pair of genes, I will actually interview you for half an hour and I will give you $100 competition, or I will give you a pair of jeans for free. So that is field study. That is real research. And then you can ask the questions in that survey. So here now we have interview. Let's say we do interview. Then you can ask clarifying questions. You may have noticed something, but you did not want to interrupt them. But in your interview, you will say, I noticed that you were actually looking at the label. What were you looking? I noticed that you've taken 5 pair of jeans. And so how did you decide on those 5 pair of jeans? This is where you can ask questions. Initially, you observe, you just look at them, you don't interrupt them. And then you do your interview. And this is a very good example of triangulation that we've talked about last week, okay? Experimental research. So in the case of Levi's, we would probably stop here. We would not do experimental research. And we're going to talk a bit more about what is experimental research, measurement and scaling. So here you would obviously have some measurement and scaling in your survey, or your phone survey, or your online survey. In our triangulation that we had here, we had survey, we had observation, and then we had interviews. So you're obviously going to have in your survey some scales on likelihood, how likely, and then we're going to learn more about these. Questionnaire informed design. So questionnaire informed design is the survey, right? Sampling, how many people? Qualitative research does not need to have a high number of people usually. But if you do more experimental and quantitative, you need to have not only a high number, but you have to have people that are representative, and then the sampling, it has to be random. So there's more complexity around it. But we are more still, and I will say most of the time you'll be doing qualitative research. And then plan of data analysis. So once we have all the data, then we need to do analysis. We're far from there. But we went as far as saying, maybe if we think of Levi's, we could do the survey, we could do the observation in the store, and then we can do interviews too. These are not the only options, obviously, but these are things that we could consider. So that is part of your research design. In your research design, you're actually thinking, what could we do? What do we think we could or we should do? Given the problem, given the business problem and the research question, you start thinking about the activities or some methods that you could use for your research. So you're starting planning, and you could almost, at some point, when you know exactly what the research design will be, you could hire an agency to do it for you. Or you could, and you should be able to give it to any researcher who's qualified, and they should be able to run it on your behalf too. And also, you may have other people helping you to do the research. So you could actually have them to help you to think of the design research as well. It's always good to have other people involved so that you can have another way of making sure that your research is actually not even biased. I gave you last week a PDF for good research project. And as a researcher, we can actually positively or negatively influence the research as well. So having other people is always good because they can challenge you to make sure that your research is unbiased and your research is actually very looking at the things that you said you will be looking at. For example, perhaps maybe you're convinced that for Levi's consumer preferences, the color of the jeans, I'm just going to make it up. The color of the jeans is the most important element because perhaps you love blue and you really want to show that blue is the color, but perhaps it's not at all a factor, but you're convinced and this is what you want to show. But you're already going in with being biased. So someone else may come in and say, I have done other research and the color has nothing to do. It's the fabric, the material, and also the deepness of the pockets. I'm making it up. It would help you to be challenged and also make sure that that you're not And then you're bringing as much transparency and you're being ethical to the research, and your client will be getting the real answers and not something that you thought that you would want to influence and push. Okay, so research design. There are different approaches when you think of research. You can do exploratory research. We're going to talk in more details about what exploratory research is. And you can also do conclusive research. And then in conclusive research, there are other things that you need to consider. But first, we're going to start with the exploratory research. Often when you do exploratory research, you're at the beginning of your journey. So you're beginning. And this is probably where all of you are in your research at this point for your main project. You don't even know which company you will do. So you're going to be very, very, I will say, not unfamiliar with probably the business or the topic or the challenge that the business is. You are going to be in the exploratory research. It's rarely, and I doubt that any of you will be in a conclusive research yet, because you're still exploring what the topic is and what the challenges are, what the industry will be as well. Perhaps you're going to be teams of 4 or 5, and maybe there's someone, you're going to pick a team that someone works where, but you're all going to need to understand and get up to speed on what the business is. And the students who works there will be able to help you or guide you, but you are going to be in finding out and trying to learn. So you're not really going to be at this stage. Conclusive usually is somewhere in here. You already have a bit more information about what it is, and you're a bit more specific on the variables, what is consumer preferences and genes preferences, and you just want to go deeper. But we are all here at this stage. We're at the beginning of our research. So you can think of this as your research journey, overall understanding. We're at the very, very top. So let's explore a little bit more about what is exploratory research. Before I go further, are there any questions, anything about anything that I've mentioned up to this point? Exploratory, it's you want to provide insights. So you still want to understand what is consumer preferences. How do people even buy jeans? Maybe there's more to consumer preferences. So you want to look at insights. You still want to try to understand the business or understand those customers, because maybe you've never done any research. Now, the more research you will do about a specific customer or a specific segment, then you will be adding on more about conclusive, and then you're going to become better and better and better. But you're also going to be at the exploratory. And why do we do exploratory is we want to understand the information needed, and then we still don't know exactly what we need in terms of information when it comes to consumer preferences. Same thing with, let's say we want to do a research about COVID and mental health. Most of you are probably very limited in what is mental health, and not just about what you think of mental health is, especially if you're not an expert. You absolutely need to do some research on secondary research of what is mental health and how do we even assess it. The research process, when we are doing exploratory, is flexible and somehow unstructured. So you have a bit of an idea what you want to do, but you're still exploring. So you don't know what you need. You don't know what you need when it comes to consumer preferences for jeans. So you do want to be flexible so that you can actually add new methods, right? So if we think of our research, so this is where you want to be flexible so that you can add other tools. So maybe you're going to add some observation, maybe you're going to add a survey. And you, at the beginning, maybe you think we're just going to do some observation, some survey, and some interviews with business. But eventually you may want to do other methods too, because maybe you need to understand something else that you don't know that you have just found out. So you're still flexible to adding new. And then the timeline may also be flexible. You may have to extend, and push as well your timeline. And on structure, when we say on structure is, when you think of interview or observing, if we say we're going to go to a Levi's store and we're going to observe customer, you need to go and have a good sense of what am I going to do and what I'm going to be asking when I'm in the store. But you need to be able to include questions that you may have not anticipated. Maybe you'll need more time. Maybe you'll find out that your interview has to last 20 minutes instead of 15 minutes. And then you may actually even find out that perhaps you said, I'm going to have 5 customers, but after 5 customers, you still have a lot of questions. You're not seeing trends, you're not seeing patterns, and you feel that you need to maybe meet 1 or 2 other customers too. And you may be able to do it there, or you may have to come back to another visit. So this is an example of where sometimes you need to be more flexible in structure. And this makes sense too, because you're still exploring. So you don't know there might be surprises as you go. Okay, conclusive. When we say conclusive, we actually already have a bit of a sense of what is consumer preferences. We're a little bit lower in our knowledge, and we have variables, we have hypotheses, and we actually kind of want to conclude. So we want to say hypothesis 1, impact positively consumer preferences, for example. So we are further down in our thinking about Levi's and jeans. We're further down when it comes to mental health and COVID. We're further down in our topic, and we already have hypotheses. And last week I talked about hypotheses, and then taking position on, we believe consumer preferences is affected by the material of jeans, or we believe that sales for jeans are highly affected by the color of the jeans. Or again, I'm making it up, but you're assuming a specific direction. And you can also go as far as saying it's affecting me positively. So the better the fabric, the more sales you will have. The lower the fabric quality, the lower your sales you will have. And then you also know that this is in the USA, and you've already either not validated that it's you're seeing the same consumer preferences in India. And maybe you want to go further and say, but in India, there's also this other component, is access to a store for Levi's. Perhaps maybe people are not buying online as much. Maybe people are buying to a store, or vice versa. So there might be specific variables in India that you would have to consider in your research. And then you may have to go back to exploratory. So depending, you may be at exploratory and conclusive. And then I think what might happen is you will get some answers to your conclusive, but you may have a new question that will force you to go back to explore. So you will have some back and forth as well that may happen. And then maybe that's a new research that will begin too. It's not set in stone, but be prepared that as you do your market research, as you do your real project, you may really run into this situation. And you may have to go back and do more exploratory. And then you have conclusive that is happening at the same time. So you're testing hypotheses, you know the relationship, or you're trying to understand the relationship between your variables. So you have variables. Here, when we are exploring, we don't really have variables yet. We don't really know. But here we have variables. So consumer preferences, size bucket, fabric, distribution, pricing. Pricing maybe is the only factor for jeans, or the brand, or the name. That here we just don't know. We're like exploring, we're finding out. And as we build, becoming more specific. The information that is needed is more defined here. And then you can manipulate the variables as well. This is where you start doing experimental research. We are far from experimental research at this stage. Research process is formal and more structured too. You're really going to do this. You're really going to go into, for you, if we think of Levi's, that you're going to put 2 customers and into a setup, and you're going to play with the variables and see if they're buying or not buying. You're going to be instead more observing them in the real setup as they're going and as they're buying, but you're not going to manipulate the variables and see if they're buying more or not. You're just observing and reporting. With exploratory, again, this is all available in the PowerPoint. So what I'm doing in class is I'm bringing the examples, the live examples, but obviously the PowerPoint doesn't have them, right? But you should get the book. The book has a lot of little cases as well, like this. In exploratory, your sample is small, and not necessarily representative. But if we think back of Levi's, so I said maybe at Levi's, we're going to look at 5 customers, and then we're hoping, do we see patterns? And if we don't, then maybe we continue. We add more customer, right? We add more participants. I will argue, though, that somehow they will be representative. They are walking into the store. They're walking into Levi's. They have an interest. They're considering. They're curious. So why would they not be representative? In some cases, and you're hoping that if someone walks into Levi's, they've heard, or perhaps they are interested, or they are in market for a pair of jeans. So I think there is some representation, and they are their customer. So if you're going there, you can be somehow more confident that they are, versus a survey. You never know who's going to answer the survey, right? Unless you have a list of customers that Levi's gives you. Then they are, you know that those customers have bought from Levi's, then they're somehow going to be representative because they bought from Levi's. And maybe you would want to go as far and say, I want only customers who bought a pair of jeans in the last 3 months. So it's not like 2 years ago that they bought jeans, but it's 3 months ago. So perhaps they're still buying, and they're a customer. And then they're somehow a bit more representative. So I don't want you to think that exploratory is never representative. It can still be very representative. The data analysis is more qualitative. So it's going to be notes, observation you will do. And now all of this applies for your research when I'm sharing with you, and also for the field study. The field study is really going and finding out yourself. Tentative, the findings are tentatives, but they should be tentative enough to give you enough insights or confidence of what you will learn about the consumer preferences at Levi's. But how do we get more confidence? Because we want to build confidence. Then we do our triangulation, right? This is where we build more confidence. And then we see that there's a trend. There are patterns. We're seeing that things are similar from one study to another study. So we've said survey, observation, interview, right? So we're seeing that the data is actually starting to look very similar. We see 1, 2, or 3 across. You're always going to have exception. Sometime, and yes, they can be followed by further exploratory or conclusive research. So once that we understand that this is what affects behavior, then we can say we're going to test, and then, or we're going to do conclusive. So if we say price affects, we learn through exploratory that price affects people, consumer, then we can play with price and see cheaper, more expensive, do they still buy? And then maybe there's another variable here. Maybe it's the color, and maybe here it's the size. Who knows? We don't know yet. Then you can start playing with it, manipulating the variable in a control environment, and see if more people are buying or not. And then this is going to be multivariate, bivariate, multivariate, which we're going to talk later in class. Okay. But we are all in the exploratory to try to understand what affects a certain behavior. And then everybody at this stage is in that stage because we just picked the business, hopefully, and a problem we want to also help solving. What are some of the uses that you will use exploratory research? So we are, again, exploratory research. Perhaps you want to help formulate the problem or define the problem more precisely. So we are here in that stage. Identify alternative course of actions as well. We need to be flexible because we may need to do observation, survey, interview. Perhaps we're going to need to do more interviews. Perhaps we need to do another survey. We don't know, right? Or maybe more secondary research that we're going to discuss as well. And maybe we're going to look at our primary data as well that has been done. Primary customer data are all of the sales that have been done by a customer. What do we learn from those primary data too? And that, I will say, that's step one that you should probably be doing for your research. Then you maybe you need to do more exploratory to develop hypotheses, just like we've looked at consumer preferences. Perhaps you want to start isolating variables. So what is affecting customer preferences? We said price, color, size. We don't know, right? Distribution of the items. And perhaps the brand is really important. Gain insights for developing an approach to the problem. So, and establish priorities for further research too. One research always usually bring more questions, answers, and more questions for other topics. And this happens all the time. Research, you're never done with research. That's really the key message. When you think you're done, you're not done. Some of the methods that you will use, and I've already shared with you, surveys. Maybe you're going to survey experts, people that are experts in jeans, in consumer buying for jeans. And that could be internal people. And then you could, and I will say, this is probably where you begin. You want to begin with the people that actually work maybe at Levi's. Said, I have done that research, and that would be part of your secondary research, or you interviewing the stakeholder or the people in the business and say, what have we done before? And that is from last week or the week before. Surveys, secondary data analysis, absolutely. And we're going to talk more in qualitative research, just like the way that I've said. And Nokia and most businesses have ongoing research. And Rogers did, I've led research, digital research, and that was an ongoing basis. Every month we had one research that would be done. And we were at different stages. We were at research, exploratory. We were at, I will say most of it were exploratory, but I did conclusive research through tools that are available on websites that I can survey, get high number, and then it's quantitative, statistically significant, and it's a controlled environment. So I have done that too, but most of the research though has started with the exploratory as well. So I was doing all of that at the same time. Now we're going to move on to, so we just spent a bit of time on exploratory research. So this is where we try to answer more into. Here again, conclusive, we are a little bit lower in the funnel. So most answers that we had, we kind of answered. And there are two types of conclusive research. So descriptive or causal. Okay. And then you're going to hear the terms cross-sectional and longitudinal design. So longitudinal design, do we know anybody who knows what longitudinal design is or longitudinal research? I don't know how much we are going to go in depth for this specific project for this class tonight, but the book goes in great length. But do we have anybody who knows what a longitudinal research design or design is? Think of longitude as long term. So what happens is we may want to measure customer preferences for jeans preferences. So we are in September 21. Maybe we want to do in October 21, and maybe we're going to do another, this same study. So same people, the same customer that you follow over a period of time. And you want to see if their jeans preferences has changed over time. Maybe this 3 months is not representative, but maybe we would do a year. And in a year, you would do the same research. So you would do the same survey. Perhaps maybe you would do the same survey to those customers at 3 times at different time and see if they've changed over time. That's longitudinal. What is cross-sectional design then? Is different set of customer. So September 21, October 21, December 21, you have maybe 3 surveys, 3 set of customer or participants. It's not the same people. You're not following them over time. Okay, so let's spend more time on what is descriptive. Now, obviously, in your research, what method are you going to do in descriptive research for this project, for this class? which method, or do you think that you're going to be doing cross-sectional, or do you think you're going to be doing longitudinal design in your research for this class? The likelihood is you will do cross-sectional design because you're not going to have time to redo another survey or redo another interview or redo observation with the same people that you will be including into your study. When we think of descriptive studies, so this is, again, we have more data, right? We know the variables, we have hypotheses, and we are lower in our thinking, our knowledge. So we are going after specific elements. So maybe you want to do some sales studies. You want to look at a particular market potential in one area. Maybe you want to look at market shares. Maybe you want to do a sales analysis. So you're more specific. You're not asking what is influencing, but maybe you know that market potential, having enough people, having enough market shares, or what also is affecting your market shares. Your sales analysis, what have we sell? You're more specific. But everything is around your sales, your consumer perception and behavior studies, impact of image, what people use, how to use your product, advertising, impact of advertising or no, your impact of pricing. So you have, these are all variables, right? You can think of variables. And then your market characteristic studies as well. Your distribution, your competitive analysis, your substitute products maybe. So you're dealing with more specific elements or components that can actually affect. And then if it's called descriptive, it's because you're trying to describe, right? Something very specific. So you're not saying, what is consumer preferences? What is mental health? You know mental health, and you've divided up in components. So we've said consumer preferences is made up of 1, 2, 3, and all these things affect, and now you want to be able to describe them in even more detail. So you already have a good sense of what you're dealing with, and you just want to go and get more insight. You want to use descriptive research, again, to describe the characteristic of relevant groups. Who are the consumer buying genes? Consumer, it could be salespeople. Who is best at selling jeans, or the best organization of the market areas as well. So you're more specific in your research. You want to maybe estimate the percentage of units in a specified population exhibiting a certain criteria. Who's buying jeans in India? Where, how, where, them. So you're trying to describe a phenomenon, and then, or you want to determine the perception of product characteristic. What do people think or see in the genes or our genes, or the substitutes or the competition genes? So you're very, very, I would say, targeted. Your research is probably more narrow, more specific as well. You may move to descriptive research once you've done your exploratory research for the business and be able to go a little bit further down into your thinking, and then you would be moving more into that descriptive research, and it would be good. I mean, if you get, but me, I will be happy as long as you understand the process. And but if some of you are go as far as descriptive, even better. But you'll have to just adapt to whatever is makes sense to the challenge that you want to solve for the business, and that I see that you actually understand what it is that you do. So it's not quantity, it's quality of the work that is important. Some of the methods, so you will see that some of the methods can be repeated. Survey, panels, observation, I've already mentioned. So you can still do survey, but your survey is going to be a lot more specific. You're not going to be exploring, you're going to be a lot more specific in your survey and the questions. Descriptive research remains the most popular way to collect primary quantitative data in marketing research. So you're kind of collecting, you're collecting primary quantitative data, but you can still be collecting primary quantitative data with your other type of research that we talk about, exploratory research too. You could explore your existing customer, you're getting data about your existing customer. So I think what I want you to do is I want you to understand that there are two types. One is you're very high in the funnel and you're still trying to understand what is consumer preferences. As you move through your journey, this is where you have a lot of questions. as you move through your journey, you're answering a lot of questions and you're just becoming more specific. And this is where we are exploratory. Here we're trying to describe and be able to describe more. That is really what is more important, but you can do, I can do observation, I can do survey, I can do interview, I can still do observation, survey, interview, but I'm just more specific in what it is that I'm looking for. So don't think of observation or questionnaire or surveys or only in one. Like it can very well be between exploratory and descriptive. Okay, so if you remember, we had descriptive and we had causal research. When you do causal research, now you're trying to say, this is causing. So a price increase will cause customer to not buy your product. So you're really saying, not only what do we see in consumer preferences? Here we were saying descriptive was, we have a set of variables and then they are affected by one another. But we're not saying that one is necessarily causing, but they are related and they are affected. Here you're saying that variable A is causing a change in variable B. And you're really saying it's responsible for causing, responsible. And often, an X is cause of Y, cause and effect. If I change A, then B will change too, maybe positive, maybe negative, and you will know the relationship too, and you will tell the relationship through your hypotheses. So you're trying to cause a cause and effect. You're not going to have time to do cause and effect in the research that you will do, but you will understand that there's variables that are involved. But maybe you've done causal, maybe another study has done causal research for your study where you, in the business that you will pick as well. In that you will know through your secondary research, internal or external. And we're going to talk a bit more about that tonight. Okay, so we've talked about a different type of research. There's exploratory or there's descriptive, and then you may have descriptive and also causal, and then you may have conclusive as well. So exploratory or conclusive, we are going to be more in the exploratory stage for this class. And but as you progress and you get more information, you may move into more conclusive, and then you may do descriptive, and most of us will do descriptive. We're not going to be in the lab doing causal at this stage. So now we're going to move on to primary and secondary data. Does anybody know what primary or secondary data is? Let's begin with, what is primary data? What is primary data? What do you think primary data is? And again, this is in class, we're safe. It's a safe place. I don't expect you to know much, but give it a try.
So wherein we generate the data, we collect the data by our own self, and secondary data is where data is already available and we consider that for us research.
Yes, Irfan. So primary data is data that you've collected for your own purpose and for your business, for your own purpose. And often it may just be customer data that you may actually be looking at. Maybe you're Levi's and hopefully you have a customer databases. And then maybe that my databases has information about the jeans and the sizes and the pocket size and features. I don't know. That would be your primary data. So you would know what people are buying, but you may not know why are people buying, right? But it's your primary, it's your own data. Now, perhaps it is data that you've collected. So you've already done it's data that you have that you can actually look and then for a specific purpose, and then perhaps it may be just in the USA or maybe let's say in India. If you think of Levi's, you would hope that they have customer in India, but let's say that they have no customer in India and they've never been to India and they have no stores, but they just want to open up to the market. Then the chances are they're not going to have primary data for India customer. But they should have primary data for the US. So yes, the primary data is your own data. So it's research that you would do. So, and in our class, you have to do your own. You will have to do your own research, so that you'll have your own tool, and you may have a survey, you may have observation, you may have interview. So the data that you will be collected in all of this will be your primary data. It's the data that has been collected by you for the intent and the purpose of this research. So it's originated by researcher for a specific purpose of addressing the problem at hand. So you have your problem. So we have consumer preferences for genes that we want to assess, and we're collecting all data. So that would be your research will be your data. But before you do your own research, you are going to look at other data that is available, that may be other research that you've done internally at Levi's, or that other companies have done, like Nielsen, or I share with you a list of vendors, top vendors that have tons of consumer data when it comes to consumer preferences. Markets share many sources of data that you may be interested in. And they have done with other clients research, hopefully about customer preferences for jeans in the USA or in India that you would probably want to look at. So that would be an example of a secondary data. So it's looking at data before your own research, right? So secondary is data or research before doing your own research. So it's anything, it's asking the question, what have we done before? So what has Levi's done when it comes to measuring customer preferences before? Do they even know how do people do? And maybe they've done something internally. So that's now there's a division between internally or externally. What has Levi's done internally in the past to measure customer preferences? Maybe they have done something, maybe they've done nothing. Now then you'll say, what has been done externally? And often externally will cost money because you have to buy someone else's data and research. Internally, it's your own data, it's your own research, so it should be free, right? It's a question of have we saved it? And then I'll share with you, how do you evaluate if it's still applicable or not? But secondary data are data which have already been collected for purposes that are sometimes other than the problem at hand. Or it may also be the same problem that you're trying, but maybe 5 years ago, we wanted to know more about consumer preferences too. Maybe now we want to know how they changed, right? And these data can be located quickly and inexpensively, but I will say that it will vary. Pricing will vary. So primary data is doing, think of it, primary data is doing your own research. Secondary data is used as their research that exists that I can actually piggyback on to help me in my exploratory stage as well. So all data is important, primary and secondary, but you for your research, when you start thinking about your research, your problem, your first step will be do we have secondary data or research that we can review? And that was the exercise of Levi's last week. And I said, go to the internet and search, Google search, and then usually you will start on Google search. Consumer preferences when it comes to buying jeans. And then you will look and see what you will find. There are multiple databases that are available that you may have available access. You may be able to sign up for some of those research for free as well. But that is the first step that you will do to try to understand what is consumer preferences. So if you do COVID and mental health, what is mental health? How have other people measured mental health? Now, COVID, what have we learned from COVID, and what have others done about COVID and mental health? There's been research that have already been done, right? But you want to look at what have we learned and what do we need to then go and find out ourselves in the primary research, our own research, so that we can answer the questions that we have. You may realize that the secondary research and data will answer your question, and it's appropriate, and then you don't need to do your primary research. Then you may say, we don't need to do first research, we're confident, and then I'll give you a set of criteria to evaluate that. But you may very well discover in your discovery that there's a research that was done and it's applicable and you can rely on, and you already have some answers. Or you're going to do another version of the research because you feel that maybe the market is not the same. We don't know yet. So how do we evaluate secondary data? So there's a bit of a table, but I have so I'll invite you to read that table as well. But I share more slides coming for specific criteria. When it comes to secondary data, as I said, there might be internal data. And as Afan has told us, so secondary data is, there might be internal. So maybe you have done internal research. Your customer databases, looking at your own customer data, your data warehouse, your data mining, having an analyst. I think we've mentioned last week, analysts, you're not going to be business analysts. You're not going to be data scientists. Hopefully the business or where you're going to be will have people to help you to do very, very advanced question. Your CRM and database marketing too is one place, your social media. The book, every time the book for every chapter has a social element media. So you could use social media to also help you with your exploratory stage. So I said, survey, observation, interview, maybe your survey is on social. Maybe it's email. And maybe your survey is for your customer database. Maybe your survey is also your CRM and database marketing too. And then your survey you distribute on social media. That's how all of these things connect, okay? Now, external will be Nielsen or anyone else outside your business, right? Outside that has maybe conducted a similar research. And then they may also use, so we're external, they may also use social media too. They may also use or do research for business government. Business government will have a lot of databases about demographic, markets, stats, mental health. They will have data about mental health. They will have how many people have mental health issues in Canada. And then you will find a lot of data available. If anything, there'll be a lot of a sense of, my God, this is a lot of data. And then, so business, non-government, and then government, business, other business may have looked at consumer preferences. Maybe you would discover that The Gap has done a huge research about consumer preferences in the USA, and you feel that perhaps it's relevant to what you're trying to do. And then syndicated services is where other business may have paid businesses to do research for them, and then they will charge you, let's say, $200 to have access to a report, so that you don't have to do your own research, but you're hoping the report will give you some good insights. What happens usually is you do your secondary research at the very beginning, secondary data research, when you're at the exploratory, at the explore stage, to help you inform, understand, so that you move down to your understanding of what the problem is. And then this is where you're going to become more specific and you're going to move on to your descriptive. But you do your secondary at the very beginning of your journey. And all of you needs to do that. You all need to do your secondary. And in my report and in the International Market Project, there is a step where I ask you to do your, ask, what have you done for secondary research? How, and then to inform you study your research. Now we're moving on to what is so unique about international marketing research. And then, but I have more details about the benefits of secondary data. So let's just, I'm going to change the order because I've added some of the slides. I'm going to change the order. Okay, international marketing. Okay, the benefits of secondary data. They will help you to identify the problem, identify/understand the problem. What am I dealing with? Better define, right? We're in here. We're trying to move through the funnel, develop an approach to the problem. So you're going to start thinking, knowing, what do I need to do for my research? And then formulate the research design. So maybe you're going to have a bit of a sense of variables, what affects mental health, what affects consumer preferences, and perhaps the in-store experience. You find that the in-store experience is very important. Then this is why you've decided to do your in-store visits of observation, right? So you're defining, and you're informing your own research. Answer certain research question and test some hypotheses. So at this point, though, when we're kind of going more about our descriptive. So we're a bit down, more down. We're kind of here, right? But we're still here for us. Interpret primary data more insightfully. So knowing mental health and reading about mental health, reading about consumer preferences, reading about genes, then that will help you to also know, what do I need to look in my CRM data, in my marketing data, in my customer data? So for example, if we learn that the people who are buying your genes the ones that are buying your genes have been long-term customer. Then you would want to see in your customer data how long someone has been a customer and see if they're buying more and if they've been buying more as well from you and more products and more genes. We don't know, right? So it will tell you what to look for into your own data as well. That would be a good use of your using the research to help you. What do I need to look in my own customer data? Let's say that another variable that you find in your own research is proximity to a Levi's store as a variable. Then you would want to see in your customer data their location to a store. And see if those customers that are closest to a Levi's store buy more often or not. And perhaps then, how do they buy? Is it online? Is it a store? And you're going to find out that really, if someone, it doesn't matter because they can buy online now. We don't know. So this could be, all of these could actually be idea for research, for your own research. You may find patterns in your own data, but to know that you should look at how long someone has been maybe a Levi's customer, how far are they from a store, might or might not impact someone buying. You need to do some research. You understand that those variables played a role in other research. Then you will say, do they play a role for Levi's when I look at my own customer or not as well? Examination of available secondary data is the prerequisite to the collection of your primary data. So you have to do your secondary research before you do your own research. You can already start doing your secondary research data. Once you know what your problem, what you're trying to solve, go and read about it. What has been done? What have we found? Proceed to primary data only when the secondary data or source have been exhausted, because you may actually get all the answers that you want as you go through your secondary research. But you need to ask yourself a series of questions about secondary research to evaluate that you can actually rely on that secondary research. So some of the disadvantages, I'm just going to highlight very quickly. Some of the disadvantages of secondary research, because they've been collected for purposes that are other than the problem at hand, their usefulness to the current problem may be limited, but we don't know. We have to see, is this applicable or not to our problem? The objectives, the nature, the methods that we use may not be appropriate to the present situation. There's a possibility. The secondary data may be lacking in accuracy, or they may not be completely current. They may be old. So if we were to do the COVID and the mental health, And then we're looking at research about COVID and mental health that were done in March of 2020. And we are in September 21. We may find out that people have adapted, or people are thinking or are behaving differently when it comes to COVID and mental health. And we may realize that maybe the timing is too long, or it's still adequate. I don't know. You will need to find out. You will need to discover that through your secondary research. No single source of secondary data can provide information that completely fits the needs of the present problem, but not a reason to say we cannot rely on the secondary data. Moreover, each method has weaknesses, but this is true for any research. One may suffer from biases, yes, but this has nothing to do necessarily with the secondary data. It may just be that the research was poorly done, right? Perhaps the initial research was poorly done. So that's one of the questions that you have to, the more you know about the methodology that you use, then you can say, I think it was well done, or no, it was not very well done. So this is part of evaluating that the research, the secondary research, is actually a good research. It's probably hard for you to do at this stage because you're still learning about research, but you need to be aware that all research is no good research. You can't just assume that because a research is available that it's actually good research. Combining various secondary resources can cancel out the weakness of another research. This is why we're saying use more than one secondary research. So multiple secondary research plus your primary research, right? And your triangulation as well. This is how you build confidence in your own research. Let's look at how do you evaluate? I've already kind of give you an evaluation, and then I'll give you a case study too. Review the following criteria when evaluating the suitability or reliability of secondary data. So first, and these are questions or tips that you may want to ask yourself, are the secondary data that we're finding for our international project in this class, are they good or not source of data? Then here's some questions that you can ask yourself. What was the purpose of which data were collected? So why was that research done in the first place? Is it similar or different? And is it relevant or not at this stage? And is it important? Maybe it was different, but you may still think that there's some parallel or some links that you could do. The content of the data. So what was the data that was collected? The methodology that was used to collect the data. Is it good? Is it reliable? Is it valid? When the data, I think this is important, when the data was collected as well, perhaps too much time has passed, or perhaps not, we don't know. How accurate the data and the overall dependability of the data as well. So can I depend on the data? And then for that research, you may actually find that one particular research is actually not a good research and you exclude it. Because you may learn as you read 5 research, you may write 5 research about mental health, and you will see patterns. Let's see, 5 research, and you will see patterns. For the 3 of them, they seem to be good. 2 of them, no good, because you will see they may have not been very following a similar method, and you may actually be questionable and be in doubt, and then you stick to 2 or 3 of them. I'm going to pause here, and I will open for questions that you may have on anything so far, or specifically to primary, secondary data. And we're going to do a little in class. We're going to have a quick in-class discussions about secondary or primary research as well. 4:30, so we have about half an hour left. Are there any questions or anything about tonight? Where are we going to be in this class? What kind of research do we think that we're going to do mostly? And you may not have the exact term. If you just want to explain to me what kind of research are we going to be, most of us, knowing where we are. We are at the beginning of the semester. We're very high in that little funnel, right? Call it the funnel. What will be the type of research that you think that you're going to be doing for most of your projects? Everybody's very quiet. Are you all very tired from the test?
Yes.
Okay, so do we think we're going to be doing causal research, descriptive research, like right now? If we say let's say we all have a business and we all have a research problem and or a business challenge that you're trying to solve for, do you think that we will all going to be moving to descriptive research, or you think we're going to be at the exploratory research stage?
Exploratory
Yes,
research
we are going to be at the
basically.
exploratory research.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And we're too early. We don't even know what we're dealing with, right? You're going to need to build knowledge, understanding what the problem is. How do we even define the problem? There's going to be discussions among yourself with the team members. You're going to have disagreement, not agreement, but that's okay. And then what was one of the first steps that I said that you should do for all of your projects? So once you're going to know a little bit more about the problem, the research problem, the business problem, the challenges, what will be your next step that you would do in your research to help you define what your research will be or what you will do in your research? What about doing secondary research or primary research about your own customer data, right? You could do primary research and say, what do we know about customer today at Levi's who are buying jeans? Do we know anything about their preferences, jeans preferences? That is one option. The second one will be, what do we know about consumer preferences for jeans? What have others do when it comes to customer preferences? So you will do secondary research to guide you in your thinking about consumer. So you would do, and I will say, you would probably start with secondary research to understand the problem and understand how others have solved. And that will help you to say, okay, perhaps I can get some answers in my primary data that I have about my customer, but you're going to be doing some secondary research. And then you're going to evaluate, can I rely on this research that I'm seeing? And then you're probably going to end up with a lot of questions and just list them. And you may have another research that you may want to search on. Perhaps you're going to find out that when it comes to mental health, it's income is important. You may have to do a bit of research on income in India, income in USA, genes and income. We don't know, right? You may find nothing. Then that's fine. There's going to be a lot more questions than answers at the beginning. That's really the key. But at some point, you're going to see pattern. And then you're going to say, we are going to be focusing on income, location, the location of stores, and then we're going to focus on and see and find out if it is actually affecting our own customer by looking at our primary data too. So we're going to be very, at the beginning, exploratory. And as you get more knowledge, then you're going to start slowly moving into more descriptive. You're going to know a bit more about the variables that may be involved in your research. But you're going to be exploratory at the very beginning. At some point, though, in this tonight is research design, then you'll have a sense of what do we want to do in our research. And this is where you're going to say, I'm going to do a survey. Maybe I'm going to do store observations. Maybe I'm going to do an interview as well of the consumer when I'm at the store that I have observed. So that is part of your research design of what do I need to do to go and find out some of the answers that we still don't know what the answer is. That will be your research design. And you could do it yourself or you could give to someone else. But in this class, you're going to do yourself with your class, with your classmate. So for tonight, we had some readings. So I have readings that I share with you. Chapter 3, get the book. And the chapter 4 in the cultural dimension of international business. So chapter 4 is about non-behavioral factors when you are doing international business. So I think you will like this chapter. It talks about gesture, body language, handshake, body position, like leaning when we meet someone, what cultures, what it means to different cultures, and how sometimes we can fall into the trap of doing something that may actually not at all be appropriate with a different culture. Short chapter, fun read. And at this point, make sure that you actually go through the, for those of you that are new in class, I have created a module that only talks about the International Market Research Project. So let me just highlight, because I know some people have joined the class tonight. International Market Research Project. In teams of 4 to 5, start going through the material. I've been mentioning and making a lot of mention about that research project, but there's a full section just there to help you and guide you. I even posted last week, where should we be? Where are we in our thinking when it comes to research? Last week, we were at problem definition. And this week, now we've moved on to research design, right? So all of the boxes here, we've gone through from last week, week 1 and week 2 as well. So there's a full section. But the reading, so you have the reading for this week, and then we have the class lecture that I have opened up in class discussion. So I have a little case study, and I've been mentioning it through our lecture tonight. So let's have a little discussions. I know you're tired, but let's go back and ask yourself some questions in just as a bit of a recap from what we've been talking to since after a test. You want to define, and I'm giving you a scenario, and this may very well be in the class. And if you've seen the tests that we've done today, I've referred back to McDonald. So we had an in-class discussion about McDonald last week. I give you blog articles, and then we discuss it in class. So I could very well have questions that will come back to this mental health, COVID and mental health in Canada. So, and again, it's available, you'll be able to read it, but I'm just gonna read it now. You want to define, so you want to define / understand mental health and understand the impact of COVID on mental health in Canada, okay? You came across some studies, so that means you've done secondary research, mainly consumer surveys. So I'm telling you that you've done some research, and then what you found is they've only, at this point, the research was primarily surveys that were done at the very beginning of COVID to better understand mental health and COVID in the summer of 2020. We are in September 21st, right? And now I'm saying you want to understand COVID and what the impact of COVID is on mental health. I'm going to repeat. You want to understand, or you want to define mental health, and you want to understand the impact of COVID on the mental health in Canada. This could be a very real scenario that I would give you, and that you may do as international business students. Then you've done your secondary research. So you started doing some secondary research, what you should do, because maybe you've never done COVID and mental health, to understand what do others have done when it comes to COVID and mental health. And then you found a bunch of studies that were done, but they were primarily surveys. So they've done surveys, but it was done very early on when COVID started, and in the summer of 2020, and we're in September 21. So my question to you is, should you rely on secondary data for Canadians? What about people who live in France? So let's answer first the first part of question, and then we're going to say, what about France? So let's say that you do business, you have employees in Canada, you have employees in France, and you want to understand the impact of COVID on their mental health, and maybe your staff, your employee that you have here in Canada, or your employees you have in France. This could be a research project. Or the other is you want to understand consumer behavior, impact of consumer COVID, mental health on consumer behavior. In fact, perhaps you think that COVID and poor mental health is actually affecting people of wanting to even buy anything. So that's another kind of research that you may want to do. Then you've said, let's focus on Canadian first. So me, I'm asking you, should you rely on secondary research? Could you look at the secondary research that I have mentioned? And I've already given you a bit of hints of what has been done, what you found when it comes to the Canadians. So one way to go about is the purpose for which data were collected So let's look at the first one. And but before I do this, do we have anybody who actually wants to give an answer as should we rely on secondary data at all that we've already seen to be able to answer a similar research question that you may want to do? And we're in September 21. So anybody has an opinion on could we or should we not rely on secondary data? And if we do, then when and how? You can use the criteria below to guide you. If you feel that you want to give an answer, you're welcome to do it now, or we're just going to go through we're going to go through a series of questions together. It's up to you. Do we have anybody who wants to give it a try? And let's
Okay, so it's
yes.
Ishant, sir.
Hi.
So I think, sir, scenario has changed, so we cannot rely on secondary data.
Okay, and why would you not be able to rely, Ishant? Because you said the scenario has changed?
Yes, sir. So
and what do you mean by scenario? And again, I'm not challenging you. I'm just trying to understand. What do you mean by scenario?
Okay. Like in 2020, people were suffering from pandemic, so their mentality was different according to this time.
Yes. Yes. So I think you have a very good point, Ishant. The context has really changed, right? Summer 2021, 2020 to September 21, there are 12 plus 2, maybe 14, 16 months that have changed. So the context has changed. We no longer, a lot of us are no longer confined. There's a vaccine there's a lot of variables. So absolutely, we could say, you know what, we can't really at all rely on secondary data. Or the other option is we could, but we have to be careful that the context really, really changed. And then we would say, we need to look at the context of the study. But we already know that the context is very different. So I'm going to list the context is really, really different, right? And of what it was. And mental health is probably maybe is affected and was affected differently, but we don't know yet, right? Okay, good. I like that that you've given an attempt, Ishant. Very good. This is being safe. We're in a safe environment. Do we have anybody else who has an opinion about should we or should we not rely on secondary data? Now we know context is different. We may still be able to rely on it. We don't know. We don't know. That is my opinion. But anybody else wants to give it a try, or do we want to continue on maybe looking at purpose? I know you're all very tired. Okay, let's look at the purpose. So we want to understand the effect of COVID on mental health. I think in summer 2020, they were trying to understand, is COVID affecting mental health, right? Perhaps the question maybe was different. Maybe they wanted to know, is COVID affecting mental health? And the chances are they already had a sense of the answer was, yes, it's affecting. Maybe they went as far as saying COVID is actually affecting mental health, but they don't know how and by how much. This would be an example of a very specific research question with a hypothesis. COVID is affecting mental health. So they're saying it is affecting. There's an effect. We don't know the relationship, but we could very well say that they could have gone very far, and some of the studies may say it's affecting and it's negatively affecting. So now you know that COVID is actually negatively affecting mental health. We're not saying that COVID is causing bad mental health, but it's affecting, which is a bit different than causing, okay? You may find different research that already have a research statement, and you may have a research that will say it's affecting and negatively, but you may have other research that may say it's just affecting. They're not telling you how. So perhaps the purpose may be a bit similar to our purpose. You may still want to try to understand, is COVID affecting mental health? But how is it affecting? Maybe we want to try to understand, is it affecting it the same way that it was affecting it now that we are in a different context, right? So the purpose is somehow related. I think it's related. But it may be, it may also be different. Our purpose is a bit different. Maybe now we want to know, is there been a change on how COVID is affecting mental health now that we have a vaccine and now that we're not as confined, right? So I would say perhaps the purpose is similar. So I would probably say we might be okay to consider the secondary data because the purpose is somehow related. The content of the data, we don't know. So we don't know what the content of the data, but the chances are it's going to be about COVID, but we don't know if it's, do we mean someone had COVID or just COVID in general, right? And the mental health as well. So we still, you would hope they've collected COVID data, they've collected mental health data, and maybe it was just very generic. We were all in COVID, right? Everybody's in COVID. So you may find that the data will be similar. And mental health, this is going to be the question, is what has been collected? And this would be a very good example of what has been collected, of where you would want to be really confident that whoever did study about mental health actually really did understand mental health and how you assess mental health and how do you define, and have they done their secondary research to define mental health and assess mental health. And I think you would quickly know if they've just asked someone, how's your mental health? And here's a good example. Or let me ask you the question. Do you think that you can ask someone to give you their assessment of their own mental health by just asking the question? Or you really think that mental health cannot be subjectively an answer, that you need to ask and assess mental health without asking someone about their mental health? I know this might be a bit complex, but the question is, how do we assess mental health? Can we ask someone, what is your mental health? So let's, for example, could I ask Ishan, give me, I want you to give me, do you think you have good mental health or bad mental health? Can I ask that question too? Or is that a question we can ask someone? And can we feel very confident that
I don't think so, sir.
Hey, so you see, there's no right wrong answer, right? But absolutely, Ishan. Now, I may not even know what my mental health is. I may be thinking that it's pretty good. I think as individuals, I do believe that we have a sense of how good our mental health is, right? But we would probably, a doctor or a psychiatrist has a set of tools that actually define mental health. So I may think that I'm actually good mental health, but I may actually have not a good mental health because I'm not even aware. So this is an example of looking at the data on what's been collected, right? So we don't know the answer about the content data, but this is something you would really be paying attention to. And you would already have an opinion. Ishan had very, very good, a good view and good opinion about this. But for something like mental health, there are a lot of research that have been done, and there are a lot of tests that exist to define mental health. The methodology used to collect the data, I think these two go together, like the content, the methodology. So how did we ask? And I just share with you, if you come across a lot of studies that all they did was asking people to evaluate their mental health, I would say, well, it's a bit risky, right? So perhaps then I would say, because they've only surveyed people and they asked them directly without really doing like real mental health, we really doing a check that the people had mental health issues or not, and it was actually caused by COVID. We are going to do our study. We'll assess carefully mental health, and we're not just going to ask someone. We may ask, but we are also going to do triangulation. So we're going to ask a survey, but we actually going to maybe even do I'm going far, a medical assessment. Of course, you're not going to do that in your research. And then you're going to say, we're actually going to do interviews as well in our research for mental health, okay? When the data were collected, I think here, right, Ishan said the timing here, it's a long time, the context is a long time, and perhaps the timing may be the biggest thing that we have to be worried about. So we may be able to use some of the research. And I think the research we may be able to use is how mental health was defined. how it was measured and how it was defined. We may say, you know what, they've done a very good job at defining mental health, and perhaps they found that COVID had a negative effect on mental health. So you could already say, we know COVID was difficult on mental health, but we want to find out, has it changed? Because of the context has changed. Has mental health improved or got worse in the new context of a vaccine or no vaccine? And our research will focus on this because no one has done even that research yet, okay? Accuracy of data, I think, is related to 1, 2, and 3. So anything, you know, the methodology, the content, the methodology of how do we think accurate it is, the overall dependability of the data. How can we depend on the data? Do you see how many times we have data in here? This is very central. What has been collected, why and how and when? It's all about data. It's the data. It's, you know, maybe they did not even collect any data. But rarely though, I think a survey is a data, but it's really how they define the concept of. Okay, so that said, we could rely on some secondary research, but you really have to ask yourself these questions. And then I would rely on the secondary research that where I feel the data is relevant, and it's probably going to be about mental health, how they really ask COVID and mental health, how they've connected, but I would probably do plus my primary data. If anything, I would learn about how others have measured and assessed. I think we are now, because of timing, and the chat has that, it's almost like our study would say, is the impact the same? Is the mental health the same? Or has the impact been lower because we have vaccine and COVID? So this alone could be just a big and fun research. Now, you may do your initial research and find out that most of the research was done in Canada. Now, we said, what about people who live in France? You may find no differences in your secondary research. We don't know yet. Or you may find very major differences, even on how we assess mental health. And I will say the international element for this class adds another challenge of being able to reuse or not secondary data. I think by saying international, I think it's another point that we add is the relevancy of where, right? Where it was done, which I find this funny. I took this from the book. But there's no where was it done, right? Where was the study done? And do we think that there might be some international or cultural dimensions? They may actually say, you cannot use the data because it's actually not relevant in France. But you may find that mental health is similar across countries on how we defined it, which then you say, okay, good, but COVID, the COVID context has been different in countries, right? In each country. So your head is probably bouncing at this point because these are not easy, but if you have the book, you'll be able to go in more depth. You can read more about it, and this will make sense as you start doing. So I'm gonna pause here. There's a few more slides in the in tonight's deck that talks more about the international aspects of and the ethics. So when it comes to ethics, and then there's some graphs as well to give you a bit of a recap of where we are in our journey when it comes to our research. So please go through the material on your own. And if you have any questions, then I'd like for you to ask me questions. It's 6 minutes before the end of the class. So I'm gonna open up to the class for any comments or any questions that you might have before we go. But I also do wanna get more visibility on the teams and where we are. Are there questions about the COVID or mental health or anything that we discussed in class tonight. The recording will be available after class. Once this class is over, then it has to create the video and then I post it. If for some reason you don't see the video tomorrow morning, someone can send me a message and then I will add it. My apology. I will go through the chapter test answers, and if I see anything unusual, I will let you know. And next week we're going to start with the review of the chapter test. The class, the teams. So very important. I need to get a better understanding of who is on which teams. I have moved a few people because I had teams of 3. I want teams of 4 to 5 people. So I ask that you put your initials beside each of your names so that I know that you're validated, that this is the team that you're on. Now, I suspect that I don't have a final course list in Canvas because I'm seeing a lot of people are inactive. So I think we're maybe not as big as we are as a number. I think we may be closer to 40 than 79. But what I like for you is I like for everybody to go and say, yes, this is my team. I have a few people. So Maria Fernanda did. Benin also put their initial. I want people to put their initial. This is yes, this is our team. You should really have a team. And if not, this will be the teams. Except that there's some that have 3 and I'm going to move people. You need to be 4 or 5. I will not take individual assignment. So put your name next and really start thinking about who will be the business. And then I've added columns. Who is the business? What is the business trying to solve? And what will be some of your research goals? So this is week 1 and 2, and now we're in week 3. Soon you're going to need to do your secondary research to inform you about what is this problem that we're trying to deal with, like COVID or mental health or anything. You're going to need to jump into your secondary research. So I need this from you, please. Please, if not, then I'll be making choices, and you may not like who I pair you up with. I did pair you up, but you may want to move around. But if you're okay with this, then this will be it. You're going to need to connect with your team as well. And then next week I will be posting again if we have people that want to come in class. Nobody pre-register for class, so we had no in-person class. It was all online. So Thursday or Friday I will repost if we have people that want to go in class. I know some of you are in India or in your home country, you're still not home, that's fine. But if for some reason next week you want, then you have to register. If there are 5 and less people that say I registered, assume that there's no in-person class. Then I need to have at least 5 people. If I don't have 5 people, then there's no in-person class. That is in case I forget to send a message. We've done the in-class discussions. I had breakout sessions, but I wanted you to finalize your team. I want you to decide on your company. Would you like me to open breakout rooms for any of you to meet in your team? Or are you going to facilitate that through the WhatsApp group? I can open up now breakouts so that you can meet with your team, and I don't have to stay. You guys can stay and discuss as long as you want. Would you like me to open up breakouts, and then you can move to the rooms that you want to meet with your classmate?
Sure, sir.
Sure, sir.
Yes or no?
Yeah, sure.
Yes, sir.
Below that.
Okay, I'm going to open up. I think we have, let's say 14 teams. So let me just count quickly. I'm going to open up 20 breakout rooms, and you're welcome to go to the breakout rooms. And let me just see, and then you'll be able to meet and move yourself to the room that you want. I'm going to stay around to maybe move people to the breakouts. I know sometimes some have challenge. I have added a tab to share with you some example of descriptive research. So we talked tonight about descriptive research. We talk about exploratory research, and then we talk about descriptive research. I share with you some samples of what descriptive research, and you'll see it's a lot more detail here on Canvas as one of the part of our week 3. as a topic to help you, if that will help you for even your research. And then the class lecture is available there too. Okay, so I'm going to open up the breakout rooms, and you're welcome to join any breakout rooms as you wish. If not, then you're done. We're done for the class. If there are questions, I'm happy to answer questions, and I will go through the test this week. And if not, then we're just going to see you for our next class. So I'm going to open up 15 breakouts, and then you guys can move to the rooms that you want. Are there any questions before I leave you to the breakout rooms?
No, sir.
No, sir.
Okay. So I hope you enjoyed the class. I know for some of you, this was your first class, so welcome. And if you have any questions and you haven't found the answer through the recordings or video recordings, reach out to me through inbox. I'll be happy to help you. But all the materials and everything that we've discussed is available in class, and it's been recorded, and including this class tonight that I will be adding. So enjoy the rest of your week, and we'll see you next week. And now I'm opening up the breakouts, so anybody will be allowed to go and meet with your team. And please continue to update the teams, the Excel sheet with your name and your initials, so that I know that you're validating that you're on this team.
Thank you. Hello. Hello.
Hi.
Yeah. Anyone here who is traveling this week or next week to Canada?
No, I think all are in Canada.
Anyone from Punjab here? From the Sarukhin?
I am from Punjab.
I'm from Punjab.
Ramandeep, you are in Canada?
Yes.
ਰਮਨਦੀਪ ਅਸਾਈਨਮੈਂਟ ਕਰ ਲਈ
ਕਿਹੜੀ ਵਾਲੀ?
ਜਿਹੜੀ ਕੱਲ ਸਬਮਿਟ ਕਰਾਣੀ
ਕੱਲ ਵਾਲੀ
ਨਹੀਂ ਨਹੀਂ
ਉਹ ਕਰਕੇ ਗਰੁੱਪ ਚ ਪਾ ਦੇ ਯਾਰ ਪਲੀਜ਼, ਜਿਹੜਾ ਵੀ ਕਰੂਗਾ।
ਰਮਨਦੀਪ ਕਿੱਥੇ ਰਹਿੰਦੇ ਹੋ ਤੁਸੀਂ? ਹੈਲੋ
ਸਟੇਬਲ ਹੈ। ਮੇਰੀ ਆਵਾਜ਼ ਸੁਣ ਰਹੇ ਕਿਸੇ ਨੂੰ? ਮੇਰਾ ਇੰਟਰਨੈਟ ਕਨੈਕਟ ਓਕੇ।
ਕਿੱਥੇ ਰਹਿੰਦੇ ਹੋ ਤੁਸੀਂ?
ਬ੍ਰੈਂਪਟਨ।
ਤੁਸੀਂ ਤਾਂ ਪੁਰਾਣੇ ਹੋਣਾ ਇੱਥੇ।
ਨਹੀਂ 3 months ਹੀ ਹੋਇਆ ਹੈ।
ਤਿੰਨ ਮਹੀਨੇ ਠੀਕ ਹੈ।
ਹਾਂਜੀ ਵੀਰੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕਿੱਥੇ ਸੀਗੇ ਦੱਸਿਆ?
ਮੈਂ ਵੀਰੇ ਮਿਸੀਸਾਗਾ ਮਾਲਟਨ।
ਕਰਨਾ ਕੀ ਆਪਾਂ?
ਕੁਛ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰਨਾ, ਵਿਹਲੇ ਆਏ ਤਾਂ ਬੰਦ ਕਰਕੇ ਚਲੇ ਜਾਓ ਜਾਣਾ ਜੀ।
ਗੁੱਡ ਨਾਈਟ ਕਰਨ ਲੱਗਿਆ।
ਗੁੱਡ ਨਾਈਟ। ਅੱਛਾ ਆਨੰਦ ਤੁਸੀਂ
ਮੈਂ ਇੰਡੀਆ ਚ ਹੀ ਹਾਂ, 27 ਨੂੰ ਅਪਲਾਈ ਕਰਨਾ।
ਆਈ ਥਿੰਕ ਆਪਾਂ ਇੱਦਾਂ ਕਰ ਨਹੀਂ ਸਕਦੇ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਇਨਫੋਰਮੇਸ਼ਨ ਪਹੁੰਚ ਜਾਣੀ ਹੈ। ਤੁਸੀਂ ਲੌਗ ਇਨ ਹੀ ਰਹੋ, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਆਪਣਾ ਜਾ ਸਕਦੇ ਹੋ ਮਿਊਟ ਕਰਕੇ, ਉਹ ਆਪਣੇ ਆਪ ਹੀ ਆਪਣਾ ਲੌਗ ਆਊਟ ਕਰ ਦੇਣਗੇ ਆਈ ਥਿੰਕ।
ਮੈਂ ਸਮਝਿਆ ਨਹੀਂ।
ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਨਾ ਆਪਣੀ ਇਨਫੋਰਮੇਸ਼ਨ, ਹਾਂਜੀ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਆਪਣੀ ਇਨਫੋਰਮੇਸ਼ਨ ਜਾਂਦੀ ਹੈ ਵੀ ਕਿੰਨੇ ਜਾਣੇ ਬ੍ਰੇਕਡਾਊਨ ਮੇਲ ਇਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਹੈਗੇ ਨੇ ਗਰੁੱਪ 'ਚ ਜਾਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਰੂਮ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ। ਅਗਰ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਚਲੇ ਜਾਓਗੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਇਨਫੋਰਮੇਸ਼ਨ ਆਈ ਥਿੰਕ ਪਹੁੰਚ ਜਾਊਗੀ।
ਨਹੀਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਤਾਂ ਕਿਸੇ ਰੂਮ 'ਚ ਨਹੀਂ ਨਾ ਹੈ ਸਾਰੇ ਜਣੇ।
ਇਹ ਤਾਂ ਓਪਨ ਆ, ਨਾਲੇ ਉਹ ਤਾਂ
ਇਹ ਓਪਨ ਹੈ, ਰੂਮ 'ਚ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈ।
ਸਰ ਤਾਂ
ਗਿਆ ਓਕੇ।
ਕੱਦਾ ਗਿਆ ਸਰ ਤਾਂ।
ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸ਼ਰੀਫ ਬਣੇ ਪਏ
ਹੋਰ ਉਹ ਤਾਂ 5 ਵਜੇ ਕਲਾਸ ਹੋਰ ਹੁਣ ਤਾਂ ਸਮਝੋ ਚੱਲੀ ਆ।
ਕੀ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਹੋ? ਮੈਂ ਤਾਂ ਆਪਣਾ ਓਕੇ
ਪਰ ਰੋਟੀ ਪਾਣੀ ਖਾਣ ਲੱਗ ਗਿਆ ਹੁਣ।
ਰਿਕਾਰਡਿੰਗ
ਕੋਈ ਨਹੀਂ, ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਥੋੜੀ ਸਮਝ ਆਣੀ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ।
ਹਾਂ ਰਿਕਾਰਡਿੰਗ ਇਟਸ ਬਾਏ।
ਗੁੱਡ ਨਾਈਟ ਯਾਰ।
ਸੋ ਚੰਗਾ ਮਿੱਤਰੋ।
ਚੰਗਾ ਜੀ।